So I came out here to do my video today because there's better lighting out here and it's not a fire hazard. So I guess in a way the sun is kind of the ultimate fire hazard, being that it is, fire. I really don't know what I want to talk about in this video. I was kind of hoping that the discussion would help me to come up with something, but since there hasn't really been much discussion, that didn't happen. Basically, Dan and I agreed, and then we started arguing over my agreement. That happens sometimes. So I think I'm going to talk about that, which means I'm going to be comparing Fight Club to The Fault in Our Stars, which does not have its book jacket on because I didn't want to get it messed up by bringing it outside under the fire hazard sun. So these two books, as anyone who's read both of them would know, are very different books. But there are some commonalities between them in that they both have hints throughout them towards the ending. And they're both books that I think can kind of be ruined by knowing the actual ending ahead of time. Meaning, by ahead of time, I mean before you read the book. Not necessarily before you reach the end. Because The Fault in Our Stars, I think, is a book that's very much about the journey to the end and not the end so much. Whereas Fight Club, to me, seemed more, it was just about the ending. Which is probably why I didn't really like it so much, because I prefer books that are more journey books than... I care more about books, usually, if it's about getting to the end, rather than just the end. The ending of Fault in Our Stars, which I should probably just say right now, if you haven't read The Fault in Our Stars, you should not watch this video. Same with Fight Club, really. But that's the book we're discussing this month, so I kind of base my videos off the assumption that everyone watching has read it. But this was Fault in Our Stars was a couple months ago, so we may have some newer viewers who haven't read that. And if you haven't, you really, really should. The ending of The Fault in Our Stars was, to some people, like Dan and Julia, too obvious. To me, I knew how it was going to end from reading it. I knew what was coming, I suspected it, I knew Augustus was going to die from probably about the middle of the book on. And that's not, for me at least, knowing what the ending was not because of any meta reasons where I was thinking, oh, well, structurally, this would make sense as I was reading it. I was just reading the book. I wasn't really thinking about structure and all of that stuff. I usually don't the first time I read a book. Instead, it felt very intentional for you to know the ending. Whereas Fight Club, on the other hand, it seemed like the intent, and I usually don't really care about authorial intent, but at the same time, in this case, I find it really interesting because books are written certain ways depending on what the author intends. So in a way it is relevant, but it's not the be-all, end-all that some people tend to think it is. Which was a point that was made in The Fault in Our Stars that I very much agreed with. But as I was reading Fight Club, it felt like the author didn't want me to know the ending, but he wanted to tell me anyway. By which I mean there are a lot of hints constantly that toward what the ending is, but the author writes them in a way that they seem intentionally there to be missed. So that when you go back and you think about the book after you've read it, you feel more like the author fooled you until the end. And then you go back and read it and, oh, this should have been obvious. And that's a thing that's very deliberate, I think, in the way that it is written, which differs from The Fault in Our Stars. With The Fault in Our Stars, the hints are there. They're blatantly, obviously there. But the author wants you to get the hints because it mirrors the pattern of how life works. Sometimes you do get hints to how something's going to end. And the reason we don't see them necessarily as much in life are because we're not looking for them. But when we read a book, we start looking for things because we read books differently than the way that we live life. Usually, I would say, for most people at least. We don't really look at the narrative structure of life, but we do with a book, and a lot of people do that with a book, and they can't not do that with a book, even while they're reading it the first time. So then they're going to figure out the probable ending ahead of time. And The Fault in Our Stars is, to me, not about hiding the ending at all. It's not a mystery novel. It's not Fight Club, where basically the novel gets kind of ruined if you already know the end. I would argue that for The Fault in Our Stars, the novel itself will not be ruined, the ending won't be ruined, but the journey to that ending can be ruined, or at least extremely altered, by knowing the end ahead of time. You figure things out, not necessarily with Hazel, because it takes her a bit longer to put the clues together, because, as I said, we read books differently than we live life. But you figure them out, and it becomes more like a train coming to hit you than a thing that sneaks up on you the way it does in Fight Club. So I would argue that they are very different books, written intentionally the way they are, with their surprises and their hints to surprise. Very intentionally written in two very different ways. That's how I can agree with Dan's statement that an author can include hints in a book that they don't want you to find out, in the case of Fight Club, but not in the case of Fault in Our Stars. Although I guess John still could have done that, but I don't think that that's what he was intentionally doing. So, yes. Dan, I will see you on Monday. And hopefully I will see the rest of you next week too.